to promote the use of this. And he said that basically it could be used as a euphoric drug similar to soma in his book. And he said, let us consider another type of drug capable of making people feel happy in situations where they would normally feel miserable. By making a harmless chemical euphoric freely available, a dictator could reconcile an entire population to a state of affairs which self-respecting human beings ought not. You know, so
you think that when they've started this hippie culture with LSD and everything, do you think that they'd planned another step of that, perhaps, to introduce it to the wider population to control them, or do you think do you think that was just an experiment introducing it, or?
I mean, I think both. You know, basically, they used people like Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. Grateful Dead were one of the bands that basically promoted LSD to the masses. Jerry Garcia was a CIA agent. He wasn't a musician that became a CIA agent. He was a CIA agent that was told to pick up a guitar. Right?
The CIA told him to learn the guitar so he could infiltrate the...
1968 FBI memo confirmed that Jerry Garcia was a CIA agent and that the Grateful Dead were employed to channel youth dissent and rebellion to more benign and non-threatening ways.
Right.
You know, even...
So, in other words, you see, we can come on to John Lennon, because obviously he is a key figure in all of this.
Yeah. Even Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary, who was the Tune In, Tune On, Drop Out, all of his LSD experiments, which are basically there for the empowerment of people, the spiritualist movement, they're all sponsored by the CIA at the behest of Aldous Huxley of Tavistock. So all these counterculture heroes, basically, if you're in a big acidy funk, you're not critically analysing, you're not doing anything, you're easily controlled.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who, are into all of that stuff, they think they're being radical and rebellious and that they're against the government, but actually they're being dumbed down, really, aren't they?
If you're a rebel, you've X'd yourself from society. If you've X'd yourself from society, you've got no forum to rebel. And the final person I'd like to talk about is Michael Hollingshead, who was he was Timothy Leary's guru. He was the person that got Timothy Leary involved with acid. He was also an MI5 agent, and he was the person that provided the Beatles with acid. Right. So what we're doing is we're popularising drug use. I mean, you've also got to remember who sells the drugs, who manufactures the drugs. It's the CIA. Okay, and that's provable. That's absolutely 100% provable. They're the biggest drug dealers in the world.
In Afghanistan as well, with heroin.
Well, this is another psyop. We better be over there to stop this heroin coming out of the region. There was no heroin coming out of the region until we were there.
Yeah, exactly. The heroin production went up when America took control of Afghanistan.
You've got soldiers coming back saying that they are being employed to protect the poppy fields. Okay, they're saying this. They're not lying. They're telling you the truth. Yeah. It's just whether like we said before, it's not about facts. It's about public perception.
All right, then, Neil. Well, we're going to take another break, and after the break, we're going to come on to the Manchurian candidates. Don't go away.
The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories. The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
We are talking with Neil Sanders, who is a researcher of mind control. Now, we mentioned John Lennon, and we all know he was killed by sort of a lone gunman.
Yeah,
he was a highly influential man who was part of popular culture. So you believe Lennon was shot by a Manchurian candidate. Could you just explain first what a Manchurian candidate is?
A Manchurian candidate, it comes from the film Manchurian Candidate, but it also comes from sort of Eastern, Korean, Chinese, Manchurian mind control techniques, and it's sort of an amalgamation. It's not strictly accurate. What it would basically means is a mind-controlled assassin, somebody that either does or does not know that they're doing it, and basically a trained assassin. And we know that these exist because basically, like we spoke about on the previous show, Thomas Narut and various other J.G. Watkins talked about the fact that these people can be made, these people can be manufactured, and they can be made to go against their moral codes and
to kill people.
Absolutely.
Manchurian candidates, am I right in thinking that they often terminate their own lives?
Yes. Well, basically, as I say, Michael Tsarian has actually done a lot of that, and it sort of adds credence to the idea. You've got these people that are going off and performing acts that, for whatever reason, they've got quite a lot of meaning to them, but then they never want anybody to find out what this meaning is. They'll just kill themselves in the woods, or they'll kill themselves just before the police come in. The police will sit around for hours on end, not interfering, and then the person kills themselves.
Right. So how would someone be programmed to be a Manchurian candidate?
Well,
would they be hypnotized, or what?
You could. I mean, there's various techniques, as we've discussed. You know, there's
Uh-huh.
harmonics, which is, you know, sort of subliminal, oral things like that. There's hypnotism. There's electroshock and stuff like that. Usually, a lot of these lone nuts you'll find have spent quite a lot of time in military hospitals and such like that.
Right.
They've very possibly been in the military themselves. People like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Killer, people like that. They've got intimate connections to the military. They were in the military. Timothy McVeigh, obviously, Lee Harvey Oswald.
So they've been programmed at some point.
Yeah, it's certainly
So what
possible.
about the Lenin killer then? Why do you think that he would be a Manchurian?
Well, I mean, himself, he spent a lot of time in sort of Waikiki Hospital, mental hospital, which is the known MK Ultra sort of testing ground. He had suspicious connections with certain people that would come in and out of his lives that may or may not have been MI5. He was often basically found to have quite a lot of accessible cash, no real sort of money. And you find this, basically, they're allowed to move around without any sort of real problems.
And of course, John Lennon was a thorn in the side for the establishment in America at the time he was shot, wasn't he? Because he was getting involved with certain black activists.
Well, yeah, aside from the fact that he was getting involved in the sort of Black Panther movements, you know, equality.
And he had a huge following.
He had a huge
music,
following.
You know, one of the biggest sort of artists of the century, really, wasn't
The
he?
CIA took him very, very seriously. If you read Mind Control, World Control by Jim Keith, he's got an entire chapter that talks about this. He was seen as one of the people that could channel dissent. He was seen as one of the people that basically could cause an uprising.
Yeah.
And essentially at the time it was about the Vietnam War. I think he had the idea that it was, I mean, aside from anything, it was a lie. We weren't supposed to be there. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was made up and such like that. Again, mind control. And he was definitely a thorn in the side. He was followed, he was arrested, his phone was tapped. It was made very clear to him on a number of times that basically, no, you are causing problems and you are being monitored.
Right, and what about other more up-to-date, let's talk about the Kennedy assassinations.
Well, Sirhan, it's unbeknownst to a lot of people.
So who was that? Sorry, what was that name?
Sirhan is the person that was allegedly to have killed
Bobby Kennedy.
Bobby Kennedy, yeah. I mean, it was a physical impossibility for him to do it because there was something like 12 bullets fired. Basically, there were more bullets fired than were held in his gun.
Right.
He himself says that he can't remember doing it. He did it without thinking, and at least 3 psychiatrists, Dr. John Heiss, Dr. Herbert Spiegel, and several others, concluded that Sirhan was under some sort of hypnotic induction in a trance state, and he didn't know what he was doing. When he was arrested, I mean, he's a very tiny guy, a very slight guy. It took about 10 guys to wrestle him to the floor because somehow he had this sort of superhuman strength. And a similar thing happened with Mark Chapman, basically. Mark Chapman stood, after shooting Lennon, stood there reading The Catcher in the Rye, which a lot of people have suggested is his trigger. This is the thing that triggers his alternate killer personality.
Because that's the key thing in hypnosis, isn't it, in control, is a word which will trigger that person into...
Interestingly, Mark Chapman was reading A Catcher in the Rye. John Hinckley, after he tried to assassinate President Reagan, stood there reading A Catcher in the Rye.
Right.
John Hinckley, his family was intimately connected with the Bush family. Neil Bush was having dinner with John Hinckley's father at the very same time that John Hinckley was trying to kill his boss, the president.
Right. Now, what about serial killers? Because you believe that there are several serial killers who have been convicted that we all know about that were in fact Manchurians.
Yes.
Who would they be then?
Well, people like Henry Lee Lucas, Ted Bundy very possibly, David Berkowitz. Charles Manson certainly incorporated mind control techniques. I mean, if you look at the way that the power that he had over his cult, that is, how did a 33-year-old man that's not been out of prison more than 5 years in his entire life learn these incredible induction techniques?
Right.
The other thing is you've got to realise about these Henry Lee Lucas, Charles Manson, if you look at their lifestyle, it's the quintessential MK Ultra trauma-based, you know, they were sent to school dressed